Good morning. So wonderful that we can come together here at Radiant Church on this glorious Sunday morning. If this is your first time joining us, I want to give you a very warm welcome. We are excited to have you as part of this community here today. Now today, we're going to be looking at an event that was life-changing for at least three of Jesus' disciples, Peter, James, and John in particular. It's an event that they describe even though they aren't really sure what they just witnessed. Have you ever had a life-altering event in your life? Something that helped you see the world differently than you did before? See, there are many people who have had such occurrences happen in their lives, and they may have a hard time describing exactly what happened to them. They may have seen or heard something that people around them have never experienced. Now, we all have our own unique way of seeing the world. And because of that, we think that it is the same for everyone. But there are times when it really is not. When we hear about something that happened to someone else, we may just shrug it off because we can't comprehend what they have experienced, because it's not part of our reality, because we have not experienced it. Perspective and perception is our unique way of how we see the world, how we actually see the universe. And what's interesting is that as humans, that there are realities around us, all around us, that we don't perceive. But many of the other species on this planet do. Humans see the world one way, while other species see or perceive the world another way. For instance, bats can map their surroundings using sound. Their shrieks are inaudible to humans. But we can't hear these sounds. But the bat uses these high frequency sounds. And a bat sees the world totally different than the way we do, because they rely on sound, this echo radar thing, to see the world. There are some species that are able to see or detect heat. And this is how they experience the world, which is quite different than the way that we do. There are some species that are able to see electricity. I mean, I'm not just talking about lightning. I mean, they're able to see electricity in the air that is all around us at all times. For instance, the bumblebee accumulates a positive charge while they fly, while the flowers that they seek have a negative charge. So their ability to see electricity makes it easier for them to find their targets. But what is really interesting is what some insects and animals are able to see that we cannot. It is all in the way that our eyes can see color. People can only see light, that is what is, or the colors, the lights, the colors that are on the light spectrum, that is known as the visible light spectrum, which means the light that is visible to human beings. People can only see three colors on the electromagnetic spectrum. People can only see the colors red, blue, and green. The other colors that we see are overlaps of these three colors. Our eyes are more sensitive to red than to any other color, which means that our eyes are best suited for warmer colors like reds and yellows and oranges. But there are different colors of light that people are unable to see, such as, and these are all colors of light that I was just like, they have weird sounding names, but they're colors of light. Like radio is a color of light on the light spectrum. Infrared, we've heard of that. Ultraviolet, we've heard of that. X-ray and gamma rays. These are all colors on the light spectrum that we are unable to see with our eyes. We can't see these colors, but other species are able to see some of these colors, and that is how they see and how they perceive the world. There are many insects, like the butterfly, that are able to see ultraviolet light. Flowers have a striking pattern that is only visible in the ultraviolet range of the color spectrum. So imagine the beauty that they are able to see in the flowers. Now, flowers are beautiful for us to see with our limited colors. So imagine how much more colorful and beautiful just the flowers in our world would look if we could see even more colors like the butterflies. The mantis shrimp has the most wide-ranging vision of all the species on the planet. They are able to see up to 12 different color ranges. So just imagine how differently that they perceive the world than we do. So I say all this because there are realities all around us that we can't see and we cannot experience. But every now and again, God gives us a glimpse at something that we can't normally see or experience. He did that with Peter, James, and John. They received a glimpse into heaven, and they tried to describe it to us, but their words are just not adequate. But even though this is something that most of us have never experienced, I don't believe that we should just simply shrug it off. We should try to understand this the best that we can. And what we will never truly understand, we're just going to have to leave up to faith. So today I'm doing things a little different. Today's message is not part of a series. It's more of what I would term as a transitional message. See, this coming Wednesday is what is known as Ash Wednesday, which is the beginning of the church season known as Lent. Now, Lent is the 40-day period that leads to Easter. And it's a time for us to prepare our hearts and our minds for Easter, so that we are prepared to have a deeper understanding of what Easter really means. So next week, we're going to be starting our Lent series, and that series will lead us right up to Easter Sunday. Now, the title of today's message is Transformation. And we're going to be looking at the Gospel of Matthew. We're going to be looking at chapter 17, verses 1 through 17. Matthew is the first book in the New Testament. And if you'd like to follow along as I read, you can turn in your Bible to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 17. Or you can open Matthew 17, 1 through 9 on a device of your choice. And as always, we are going to have the scriptures on the wall up here for you to follow along as well. Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them. And a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." This is the word of the Lord. Now, Matthew tells us that this took place 6 days after Peter's confession that Jesus is the Messiah. The disciples had their suspicions. They had their suspicions that Jesus is the Messiah, but they weren't sure. Jesus took them to a place where he could be alone with them so that he could teach them uninterrupted. Where Jesus asks his disciples who other people say Jesus is. Because he was attracting quite a crowd wherever he went, and people were talking about him. But then Jesus asked them, after they gave their answers of what they've been hearing other people saying, Jesus asked them, who do you say that I am? And it's at this point, Peter said to Jesus, he says to Jesus that you are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. Now Jesus confirmed for his disciples that he is the Messiah. And then Jesus tells them about his death and his resurrection. But the problem is the disciples didn't want to hear about any of that. Jesus tells them that these things must happen because it has been foretold in Scripture and that this is God's plan for the salvation of all people. So 6 days later, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John with him up a high mountain by themselves, and it is there that Jesus was transfigured. Peter, James, and John saw Jesus in a way that they had never seen him, or anyone else for that matter, before. They seen Jesus in a manner that they have never seen before. The high mountain is symbolic of the place where heaven and earth meet. The place where God is revealed. And Matthew tells us that Jesus' face shone like the sun. I mean, I can't even wrap my mind around that description. It's shone like the sun. And that his clothes became white as light. And what that, I believe, it's like his body was glowing. That his clothing became white like light. The appearance of Jesus here is similar to the description of the appearance of the angel at the empty tomb that later is recorded in Matthew's gospel. This is a hard description for us to wrap our minds around. And I don't believe that words do this description justice. But what this is describing is that Jesus' true identity is being revealed to the disciples. If they had any doubt about who Jesus was before, they don't have any doubts about it anymore. Jesus' true identity and his true nature are on open display for the disciples to see and to experience themselves. And while this is happening, and the disciples are having a hard time understanding what they are seeing, something else happens. Like, if this wasn't extraordinary enough to witness, Moses and Elijah also appear before them, and they begin talking to Jesus. Now, Moses was gone for over 1,200 years. It was 1,200 years since Moses had walked the earth by this time, and Elijah was gone over 800 years by this time. But they were there all of a sudden, standing before Jesus and the disciples. Now, Moses represents the law. Elijah represents the prophets. The law and the prophets are the most authoritative portions of the Hebrew Scriptures. Moses and Elijah are two of the most important Old Testament figures. And Matthew tells us that they were talking with Jesus. And that's where Matthew leaves it. But Luke, in his account of this same event, gives us a little bit more details of this conversation. Luke tells us that Moses and Elijah speak to Jesus about his departure, which is a reference to Jesus' death, his resurrection, and his ascension. Now, Peter is taken up in all of this, and he doesn't know what to make of it. But he feels that he has to do something about what he is witnessing and who he is with. So Peter said to Jesus that if Jesus would like, that he would put up 3 shelters, one for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Now, we don't really know why Peter said this. He could have just been caught up in the moment and felt he needed to offer something, and that's what he could offer. Or it could be that Peter was thinking about the Feast of Booths, where the Israelites would set up booths, little shelters, and they live in them, during this celebration, this festival. And they were commemorating the 40 years that Israel wandered in the wilderness. So he could have been thinking of that. But it seems that Peter is a bit overwhelmed with this entire situation. And his response is to do something for Jesus, for Moses, and Elijah. Peter isn't finished speaking to Jesus when all of a sudden a bright cloud enveloped them. Jesus is transfigured. His face is shining like the sun. Moses and Elijah appear, and Peter's just like, how about I build you some shelters? And then all of a sudden, a bright cloud enveloped them. And then they heard a voice coming from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Now, this proved to be too much for the disciples. They may not have fully understood what was happening, but they knew for sure that it was God who was speaking to them from this cloud. And as soon as they hear this voice, they fall face down on the ground, and they are terrified. The disciples would have been aware that God often made appearances in a cloud throughout the Old Testament. They would have known that this is reminiscent of Moses' experience on Mount Sinai. The words that God spoke here are the exact same words that he spoke at Jesus' baptism. But there it wasn't clear who heard the voice, as the voice was described in different ways by different people. But here it is clear that the disciples heard God's words, and this message is directed at them. God reveals Jesus as his son. And this is the true meaning of the transfiguration. Jesus is God's son. Jesus is the one who teaches with God's authority. And Jesus is the one whom we must listen to. God affirmed Jesus' identity as the Messiah. And God's mandate to Peter and the other disciples, and to us as well, is to listen to him. Listen to Jesus. Listen to what he teaches you. Listen to what he tells others. Listen to him. Years later, Peter would write about this event in 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. And what Peter said there was that they were eyewitnesses of Jesus' majesty. Peter said how they heard God's voice from heaven when they were with Jesus on the mountain. The divine voice commands us to listen to Jesus. But we have to realize that listening is more than just hearing. Listening means hearing his words and then acting on them. The way that we are to find our way through this increasingly complex world, God explains it to us. God tells us to listen to him. We need to hear God's voice in everything that we do, in every decision that we make. The disciples are lying face down on the ground, and Jesus came and touched them and said to them, "Get up. Don't be afraid." And at this point, the disciples look up, and they saw that there was no one there except Jesus. Jesus speaks to the disciples, and his touch is a sign of comfort and healing. And his words reassure that whatever happens next, that whatever happens next is going to be in God's hands. No matter how frightening the circumstances, what's going to happen next and going forward is all going to be in God's hands. Jesus tells his disciples to get up and to not be afraid. Jesus' words point to the resurrection and new life and the abolition of fear and anxiety. Jesus' love, his grace, his peace, and his compassion, they can transform us. We can look at those around us and we can see from the inside out. We will see other people in a different light. We will see other people who are also capable of transformation as well. So the disciples get up. They come down the mountain, and as they're coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them a simple instruction. Don't tell anyone what you've seen. Jesus tells them, don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Now, Jesus wanted them to wait until after his resurrection before they told anyone about what just happened to them. They now knew for sure that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Son of God. This is news that they probably wanted to tell everyone they met as soon as possible, but Jesus tells them, hold on. Jesus tells them to wait. And Jesus has good reason for this. Jesus still has work to do. He has a lot of work to do, and his work will be interrupted if he is revealed as the Messiah too early. So they are not to tell anyone. Also, the disciples don't really understand what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. They know that he is the Messiah, but they don't fully understand what that means. It will only be after Jesus' resurrection that they will truly understand. So for now, they are just going to have to wait before they talk about what they witnessed that day up on that high mountain. There are realities all around us that we can't see and that we can't perceive. Our perspective and our perception of things are limited because our bodies and our brains are finite. They have limitations. But just because we can't see these things or are experiencing these things, it doesn't mean that they aren't real. Animals and insects, they are able to see and experience things that are foreign to us. We can see and experience things that are foreign to them. And all the things that we can't see or experience are just as real as the things that we can. Jesus' transfiguration is an event that is mysterious. It is an event that is beyond our everyday experience, and it is difficult to understand. Peter recognizes Jesus' dazzling appearance in the presence of Moses and Elijah as being significant, but he doesn't fully understand what he is seeing that day. What he did understand was that Jesus truly is the Messiah, that Jesus truly is the Son of God. But at that moment, he didn't truly understand what that really meant. There are some things that are hard for us to understand because of our perspective and our limited perceptions. The things that we don't understand, we have to rely on faith. During this Lenten season, as we get closer to Easter, take some good quality time to try to gain a better perspective on the things you don't truly understand. You may never be able to fully understand some things. But the more that we wrestle with these issues, the closer we will grow in our faith and in our walk with God. The closer that we come to God, the more our lives will be transformed. God is calling you to come closer to him, and he will reveal things to you that are beyond your ability to understand or even comprehend, just like he did for the disciples on the mountain that day. So take this time. Start this week. Take the time to grow closer to God and your journey down the road to transformation. Amen. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for spending a part of your Sunday with us. Every Sunday, we're right here at the Forks Township Community Service Center with our live service at 10 a.m. Our weekly message from Radiant Church, as always, will be broadcast at 10:30 right here on Facebook Live, and our message is part of our live service. You can also follow and connect with us on Facebook at Radiant Church PA and on our website, radiantchurchpa.org. You can also support the ministry of Radiant Church through our website by just clicking the donate button. So throughout this week, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Amen.